Yeah. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Durham University's Student for Uyghurs event on Uyghur Genocide. And we're here to ask today what we can do. I'm Rahim, and I'm a Students for Uyghurs ambassador alongside Lucy and Astrid. And today we're joined by our four wonderful panelists. So firstly, we've got Rahima, who leads the UK campaign group Stop Uyghur Genocide. She's also the UK Programme Director at the World Uyghur Congress, the advisor to the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, and the Uyghur activist and singer. We've also got Mr. Luke de Pulford, who is the director of the Arise Foundation, a coordinator of the Interparliamentary Alliance on China, and founder of the Coalition for Genocide Response, and a member of the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission. He's a prominent figure in the fight for human rights and a strong advocate for democracy. Also with us today, we've got Joe Collins, who is a co-executive director of Yet Again, which is a youth-led initiative raising awareness of modern atrocity. And he's working on the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign. Joe's currently undertaking a Masters of Law, having completed his undergrad degree at the University of York. His undergraduate dissertation critically reviewed the Dulles Specialis for the crime of genocide, and he combines his passion for genocide prevention and international criminal law to provide insights into what must change for modern atrocity to be adequately challenged. And finally, we've got Jaya, who is the co-executive director of Yet Again, the same youth-led initiative that Joe is involved with, and she is also working on the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign. She is the co-chair of the student wing of the campaign called Students for Uyghurs, which is what we're a part of here today. And she has been involved in human rights activism for many years, currently centred on advocacy, including student advocacy. She has a background in genocide education and commemoration, and she is currently undergoing a degree in pharmacy. Just a little bit of housekeeping. This event is being recorded, so if anyone has an issue with that, please feel free to turn your camera off if that's what you prefer. We also ask that you keep your microphones muted, and if you have any questions, they'll have to be directed to the host of this event. Thank you very much. So we will be asking the panelist questions and then opening up the floor for Q&A. So I think Astrid is our first question.
Hiya, Rahima, could you please explain the situation with the Uyghur community in China? How long has this been going on for?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for organizing this event. I am Rahima, I'm Uyghur myself. I left my country in 2000 after witnessing Gulja massacre that happened in 1997, February the 5th. A peaceful protest was crushed by Chinese military and killing over 100 people on the day, and then followed by mass arrests. And in 1999, the Amnesty International has reported that 195 execution after this Gulja protest. So since 2000, I never went back to my country, and my last contact with my family was January the 3rd, 2017. And soon after, I spoke to my brother the last time when he said, "Leave us in God's hands," in a shaky voice. And soon after that, I learned that people who has families abroad and who traveled abroad, who are deemed religious and had foreign apps and their phones, especially young students, were arrested. And the mass arrest started in April 2017. And in 2018, August, the UN subcommittee first time openly criticized China that holding up to 1 million Uyghur and other ethnic minorities from the region. At the time, China denied it. After two weeks later, after confronted with the satellite images and credible reports from the experts and also testimonies. Then they said, well, yes, it is a vocational training centers. But later we had more survivors who either escaped or released because they are foreign nationals, or their spouse are being foreign nationals. And they have given us a very detailed information about what is happening inside these facilities, the so-called re-education camps. And Sairagul Sautbayip, who is a Kazakh teacher, and she revealed the most horrific details of torture, rape, mass sterilization of women, and forced labor. So at the moment, we know that up to 3 million, we believe up to 3 million Uyghurs and other Turkic ethnic minorities are interned in these facilities without any kind of legal procedures. And we know many people who refuse to denounce their own religion, culture, are sentenced up to 20, 25 years in prison. And we know over 500,000 Uyghurs are enslaved, and they are working in the cotton fields and factories. Over 1 million Uyghur children are removed from their own families and are placed in the so-called state-run boarding schools, but in fact it's state-run camps, children's camps. They are completely detached from their own Uyghur roots because Chinese government want the Uyghurs become Han Chinese, denounce the culture, religion, and the very identity of Uyghurs. And recently you must have seen the latest BBC report on systematic gang rape that is happening in camp. And so the situation is absolutely horrific, and several countries already, the parliament, like Canada Parliament and Dutch Parliament and the US already determined this is there is genocide. The Chinese government is carrying out genocide against the Uyghur people. And also the Essex Court Chamber, about 2 weeks ago, they have also published the legal opinion, and this is what it said. As report out how okay, so Essex Court Chamber legal opinion report outlines how there is a credible case that as part of a widespread and systematic attack on the Uyghur people in the region, crime against humanity are taking place, including enslavement, imprisonment, torture, rape, enforced sterilization, enforced disappearance, and persecution. Significantly, it further explains the credible case that the crime of genocide is occurring, as there is evidence of an intent to destroy the Uyghur population as such, including through a pattern of Chinese state-mandated conduct. This conduct includes the intentional infliction of serious physical and mental harm to Uyghur people in detention, measures to prevent birth within the Uyghur community, and the forcible transfer of Uyghur children outside of their communities. So that's all I can say for now for that question. This is what is happening at the moment.
Thank you for that, Rahima. I've got a question for Luke, if that's all right. And my question is, what is the current UK position on genocide prevention and determination this far?
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you for having me here, and thank you particularly to Rahima for your words and your continual witness. And the one thing I'd want to say to everybody on this call is, please listen to Rahima, listen to what she's telling you, listen to the reality of what's happening in Western China at the moment. It's easy to allow these words just to go through one ear and out the other, without really considering what it really means. Try to imagine that it were your family member who'd been separated, taken away from you for re-education, or if you have children, that your children have been taken away from you, never to be seen again, or that your culture were being eradicated, your graveyards bulldozed and your places of worship smashed. These are extraordinarily serious accusations which Rahima does not make lightly, and none of us on the call do. So please listen to her and take what she's saying to heart. Look, addressing your core question, Lucy, the government's position, the UK government's position, is not just this Conservative government, it's any government since about the late 1960s on genocide, determination and prevention has been this, that it's a matter for the international judicial system. What they mean when they say that is the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court, which require, well, depending on which route you take, which require the United Nations to enable one way or another. So the UK's position on genocide prevention and determination is it's a matter for the international courts. Now, the reason that this is important is, first of all, it means that the UK is saying that it doesn't actually have a policy on genocide in as far as politicians might determine it. Okay, so politicians themselves, unlike the US, which have been willing to make political determinations of genocide, politicians in the UK, for governments of all colours, all stripes for the past 40 years plus, have always said genocide determination is a matter for judges, not politicians. It's for courts, not us politicians. It's a word of such gravity. It's a word which has a criminal standard to it. It has an evidentiary standard and must be left to the criminal law to decide. It's not for us to use the word genocide. That is the UK policy. And it's a very stable policy, and it's been like that for a very long time. So there are a couple of problems with this. First of all, the international system is exceptionally slow and beleaguered by politics. So, for example, during the Yazidi genocide, 2015 to 17, it was impossible to get any sort of determination through the international system. So we had what was, to us, for those people who've been campaigning on atrocity crimes for a long time, and I was very heavily involved with this at the time, we had a very clear case. The intent was very clear. You know, ISIS was saying, we want to destroy these Yazidis because of who they are. They were saying, we want to destroy these Christians because of who they are. The intent was very clear in a way that you very rarely get with atrocity crimes. And that's normally the hard part to prove, right? So we were seeing they were putting children in ovens, crucifying people and beheading them, and they were saying why they were doing it. So it was a very clear-cut case. And during that time, the UK would come out and say, it's not a matter for us, it's for the international courts. We found this absurd back then, and we find it pretty absurd now with all the evidence which is being presented from Western China and from publicly available documents from the Chinese government. So not just is it beleaguered by politics and slow, it wasn't possible to get a referral to the International Criminal Court back then for Daesh because it would have been vetoed by Russia and China. Similarly now, we want for the case about Uyghurs to be heard, we want Uyghurs to have their day in court. That is not possible through the international system because China does not consent to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice and because it would veto its own referral to the International Criminal Court. So those routes are not possible. So our argument to the government is this. If your position is that there must be a court determination before you use the word genocide and before you engage with your obligations under the Genocide Convention, there must be a court that you can go to. And right now there isn't because they're both blocked. So that's the fundamental purpose of the genocide amendment. We're trying to close that lacuna in UK policy. So that's where policy has been, that's where it remains. That is not going to change. The UK is going to keep saying it's a matter for the international system. And it's a very convenient position for them because knowing that it's going to take a very long time, knowing that the entire system can be frustrated by international politics or even by diplomacy, and also knowing that it's very unlikely that any of this is going to happen in any time frame that requires the UK to do anything, it's a very convenient position for us to take.
Thank you, Luke. And just elaborating a little bit more on that, could you just tell the audience a little bit more about the Genocide Amendment? Some people might not might not have heard much about the Genocide Amendment. So do you think you could explain in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, sure. So there are loads of Genocide Amendments now. We're on the Genocide Amendment number 3. And we've had a number of battles over different versions of this Genocide Amendment over the past few months. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to enable there to be a proper legal interrogation of the facts so that the UK can use the word genocide with a proper legal basis. Now, initially, we were talking about that being in the courts. We were saying, okay, you want there to be a court? We've got our courts are great. What's wrong with that? Let's have a legal determination in our courts. They pushed back very hard on that and said, we're not interested in your court idea. We don't like it. Take it away. So we took it away and we came up with a new idea. And our new idea, which is the amendment which is currently before the House of Commons, having passed the House of Lords with a huge majority of 150, the amendment which is before the House of Commons says, okay, if we think there's a suspected genocide with a possible trading partner, then a committee of 5 former judges can look at the case and can determine whether or not they think that evidentiary threshold is met. And if they can, then they can make a preliminary determination of genocide. And if they can do that, then the UK will have to use the word. You know, it's going to be very, very hard for them to ignore it. So we're trying to find a way of working with the historic, long-standing government policy that genocide determination is for courts, not politicians. We're trying to work with that, but we're also trying to observe the government's red lines because they've been fighting this very, very hard. And so I hope that makes sense. The Genocide Amendment is a way of getting a serious legal analysis of prospective or developing genocides around the world in a way that enables the UK government to act.
There's been a lot of Tory MPs who have concerns about trade. I have another question. So how does the Genocide Amendment affect trade? Luke, could you please answer this?
Sure. Well, initially, we were very keen for it to affect trade. Initially, we wanted there to be no possibility of any kind of bilateral trade deal with a country that was perpetrating genocide. And we thought, well, that's very reasonable. Who wants to vote for a trade deal with a genocidal state? Surely nobody. Well, unfortunately, it turns out some people do, and they're actually quite keen on the idea. So they were also, they used the excuse that there was a violation of the separation of powers in enabling a court judgment effectively to frustrate a trade agreement. So let me be as clear as possible on that. The first Genocide Amendment said, if the court determines genocide, that trade deal is revoked. So that's what the First Amendment did. They hated that and they fought very hard against it. So we took it away and said, all right. Second version was, if the court determines there's a genocide, the government's got to decide what to do about their trade arrangement, knowing full well that it was going to be very hard for them to go forward with it. So they didn't like that. So the one we've come up with now is a bit complicated, and bear with me, because in order to try to wreck our Second Amendment, the government brought forward their own amendment. Here's where it gets super complicated. And their amendment enables a select committee to look at evidence of genocide. And if the select committee thinks there's a credible case, the select committee can then bring a debate and vote to the House of Commons on whether to continue trade negotiations with that particular state. Okay, so that's what the government brought forward to get rid of our thing because they didn't want the courts. What we've done with our new amendment is incorporate that mechanism. Okay, so the select committee now looks at the evidence. If they think there's a credible case, it's referred to our judicial committee. This is our novel thing that we've stuck in there. If the judicial committee thinks there's genocide, then the select committee can have a debate and vote. So just to answer your question very directly, we are not proposing that the judges who are involved in our idea have anything to do with trade at all. But the government has actually passed a measure which allows that. So the government's amendment allows the select committee to bring a debate and vote on the floor of the House of Commons on a trading relationship. All we're saying is you've got to have a serious, rigorous legal analysis. So we don't actually do anything on that. The government has done that now. So if they want to argue about trade, it's their own problem.
Thank you for that, Luke. Joe, I have a question for you. So there are international bodies established to tackle human rights violations, such as the United Nations. So why do you think we need genocide determination in the UK?
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you to all of you student ambassadors that have organised tonight's event. Really, the answer comes down, I think, in two parts, and Lucas touched really on the first one, is that the international courts are blocked. You know, the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice do not have universal jurisdictions. What does that mean? If there aren't universal jurisdictions, they are specific jurisdictions that only apply in certain circumstances. So that means if you want to recognise genocide in all circumstances, you can't. You can only do it where those courts have jurisdiction. Now, the International Criminal Court is a court based on the Rome Statute. It's treaty-based, and its jurisdiction is based on that. So you have to be a state party, or the UN Security Council has to make a referral. Now, in the case of China, which the persecution of the Uyghurs is demonstrating, China is not a party to the Rome Statute, nor would it allow a UN Security Council referral. It would veto such an action. So the International Criminal Court is out, not possible whatsoever. Alternatively, if you come to the International Court of Justice, in a contentious case, both parties must consent to the jurisdiction. Well, China already has a reservation under the Genocide Convention, and the particular provision it has reserved is this provision that you would refer any matters to the International Court of Justice. So China has already said it will not consent to the jurisdiction of the ICJ. So the two major international courts are not possible. You will not get any form of accountability whatsoever if you rely solely on them. But equally, and this comes on to the second reason, imagine a scenario whereby you could get a determination either at the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. It's simply not prudent to wait. I'll take the ICC as an example. Prosecutions can occur years after a genocide has already taken place, and you would get a determination of genocide after the fact. So you would have had a genocide committed, you would indict and prosecute the individual perpetrators in a criminal court, and then you will get a determination if they're convicted. Now, none of that is in time to prevent it. It's all afterwards. So it's absolutely meaningless when it comes to any form of preventative action whatsoever. It's a similar story with the ICJ. It's very rare you will get an ICJ case brought in time. And the one thing I would say, which is really key to emphasise, particularly with this amendment, is that with both of those scenarios anyway, they are final determinations. They look back on what's happened, they consider the facts and apply the definition of genocide in law and make a determination that way. Was this genocide? That shouldn't be the question. Where we have an obligation to prevent and punish genocide, it doesn't arise when there's a final determination. It arises where a state learns or ought to learn of a serious risk genocide will be committed. Now, if you rely solely on the two major international courts, you will not get a preliminary determination. You will not get any form of help when it comes to identifying serious risks. If you have those measures within the UK domestically, you're not relying on an inherently restricted system. You're not opening yourself up to vacuums and impunity. You're allowing yourself to analyse situations as they are occurring and making determinations as and when it is still possible to prevent them.
Thank you for that, Joe. And just for Rahima, could you link all this back and explain why this amendment is so important to you personally? Yeah, I think you're on mute, Rahima.
Oh, I didn't realize. Thank you. That's a great question. You know, every crime that people, when a crime is committed, you won't have a court to determine that crime. And at the moment, we believe China is committing genocide against my people. And I know most of the governments, they really look at seriously when the determination is determined in court or by the judicial body, because they can completely ignore the parliament committees or any countries, when they declare it is genocide, they say that there is a political motive and or etc. etc. But legal determination is something that is seriously looking at the evidence, all the evidence available, and make that determination. And you know, being a Uyghur myself, who been working with lawyers for many, many years for my interpreting and translation work. And I have all the first-hand information from translating the Chinese classified documents, leaked documents, to the personal victim accounts from satellite images, and also expert reports like Dr. Adrian Zenz, Darren Byler, and many other independent scholars. We believe we have sufficient evidence, but we don't have a court to make that determination. And that is why we feel that it is an opportunity for us, you know, this genocide amendment, it's an opportunity for us Uyghurs, and also for any other people who face similar situation, you know, by their own government or different government, or by group that are committing genocide against them. So I believe this is important and it is historical. That's why we're fighting so hard, I know Luke has been doing everything, is giving away everything that he can to you know, and he has been working on Coalition for Genocide Response for many, many years. And I mean, you know, with me, I'm focusing on the Uyghur campaign and focusing on how I can save my people, how I can save, you know, with so little power that I have, that, you know, I'm doing everything I can and try to find a solution. So to prevent more people being killed, raped, sterilized, and this horrendous suffering that, you know, that we are suffering. I mean, even though I am free in this country, and I know every Uyghur living abroad, they all suffering because of what is happening back home.
Thank you for that, Rahima. Obviously, you described some great atrocities there, the likes of which the world hasn't seen since the Second World War. Obviously, during the Second World War, after the Holocaust, the world came together and declared that they wouldn't allow something like this to happen ever again. The exact words are this never again. Do you think this has been achieved? You should go first, Rahima, and we'll go around and ask everyone.
Yeah, is that question for me? Yeah. Obviously not. You know, we celebrated, commemorated the Holocaust last month. It has been very, very emotional. And a lot of Uyghurs are asking the same question: why? Why the promise they are still not really doing anything? Why the world is so silent? Their countries can do something, but they're simply not acting.
That's great. Thank you very much. Jaya, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that's a really important question to ask. Put simply, no. Never again. It really is an empty promise. And Joe, myself, and Kirsty have a background in Holocaust education. And every single year for the past 7 years, on the 27th of January, all politicians come together and they say, we will never let this happen again. And they look Holocaust survivors in the eye and they say the same thing. Now, in reality, when they have the power to do something, there's a lot of resistance and we're having to fight so hard to get the right thing done. The last 80 years have been marred by inaction, and we need to break this cycle of impunity, and we need to try and essentially establish change. And whether we ask for it or not, that lies in the hands of our generation. And we have to show generations that come after us that there is a precedent we need to set, and this is how we deal with human rights abuses, and this is when we say enough is enough. And that really is why hearing Rahima share her testimony and hearing other survivors is so important. It's because we can say that we are witnesses and we are going to bear testimony to what they've said, and we are going to challenge it. And next time a politician says never again, we're going to hold them to account. We're going to make sure that they live up to saying those words.
Thank you, Jo. And as you say, obviously, we've seen this happen time and time again, and nothing seems to be changing. Jo and Luke, do you have perhaps a legal or political insight on this?
Yeah, I don't mind coming in here just to say that the UK has never, ever succeeded in recognising a genocide while one was ongoing. Never. And if you delve back, as I have done, and do things like get hold of declassified evidence from the Foreign Office and whatever, you find that at every turn, they are at pains to try to avoid recognising what's happening. So during the Cambodian genocide, the excuses were things like, oh, we don't have evidence, and we think that actually the motivation is not ethnic, it's political. So that's what they said back then. The Rwandan genocide is desperate. I mean, it's stuff that they still don't want to be in the public domain because it's so hideously embarrassing. And why do you think we have William Hague and every foreign secretary, every anniversary of Rwanda, beating their chests and saying, oh, how terrible, we can't have that happen again? Because it was humiliatingly awful. We knew what was happening and we refused to act. Yazidi genocide, same thing. Everybody knew what was going on, didn't act. And here we are in the midst of another genocide. The Rohingya genocide was the same, by the way. Here we are in the midst of another genocide. And what's the UK saying? Got to wait for the evidence. You've got to make sure that there's an international legal determination. We've devised a system, which means we don't have to do anything. And the UK has never done anything about a developing genocide. We've never prevented, we've never punished, we've never done anything meaningful under the Genocide Convention, unfortunately. That's the bitter truth, and I couldn't agree more with Jaya. It's really going to have to be your generation that sorts it out.
One thing I would simply add at the end to all of that is that thus far, clearly, it has never worked. All we release are statements of condemnation, strongly worded letters, the right things that are there at the right time, and hope for the best. Realistically, even now, in respect of the Uyghur genocide, the government is saying it's doing its utmost, lists the actions it's done. The reality is, since 2017, this genocide has in no way been prevented. In fact, it's gotten worse. So unless you recognise that what you are doing is limited to the extent it's having no impact and change, we will continue to see never again.
It's Paul here from Canada. I'm originally from Hong Kong, and our country just passed recognizing there's a genocide in Xinjiang. The root of all of this problem is why it is so insistent for the Chinese government or the Chinese Communist Party to keep doing it despite all the condemnation from the world is greed. There's a huge money profit-making machine, and in China there are a lot of the high-ranking Communist Party officials. They all have multiple million, hundreds of millions of money, ill-earned money that they try to hide and spend or buy real estate overseas. And then when the officials, they all send the children overseas so that they know that one of these days, maybe there will be a day of reckoning. And then they plan that they will go move us overseas afterwards. And I know that in the US, they have sanctioned the officials or the party members or Xinjiang people, those officials. You know, it's hard to get it done in the UN Council because China is a key member of the Security Council. And you have to hit a greedy, profit hungry party in their pocket. And all this Third Amendment that you were talking about by Luke, how would that relate to the method of discouraging them? I think it may be a little bit hard to place them in court for a trial, but how about hit them in the pocket or some other ways?
Do you want me to answer that, Chair? Is that okay? All right. Okay, look, the in a nutshell, I would say that there's a big difference between a political determination, which is what's happened in Canada and the US, and a determination based upon legal obligations, which triggers obligations under the Genocide Convention. Big, big difference. So it's one thing for a politician to say, wow, we reckon it's genocide, and here's what we're going to do. It's another thing to say, we think that the conditions for genocide are present legally, and we agree to be bound by our obligations under the Genocide Convention. You're into a totally different realm when you do that. So politically speaking, and according to the jurisprudence of the ICJ around this kind of stuff, that means that you have to deploy whatever your state has available to it to stop this thing from happening. That's why the UK fears what we're doing. Let's be very clear about this. If we get a serious legal determination or a mechanism for a legal determination of genocide, the UK will have to act. And so will other countries. And of course, China is scared of that, because that will have to mean that the UK deploys what it has to prevent this genocide and to stop it from happening. That's why it's powerful. Why else do you think we're coming under this massive resistance? It's not just about a little, you know, an annoyance to the diplomatic relationship. It's serious. So I would say it goes far, far beyond the political determination, and hopefully gets us into a position where we're talking meaningfully about engaging with our obligations under the Genocide Convention. I hope that answers your question, Paul.
I understand. I understand.
Okay,
I think my last comment is, I think we try to tackle this problem from many different angles. I think the most effective one, the most serious one is with the legal obligation. That's for sure, everybody agrees on that. But while this process is long and difficult, it shouldn't stop us from trying other things to help us along the way.
That's great. Thank you, Paul. If you've got any other questions, if you can just message them to the host and they'll put them through. Lucy,
yeah, I have a question for Jay, if that's okay. Okay, so Jay, you co-run Students for Uyghurs, which allows young adults to get involved in the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign. So could you just explain to everyone here what Students for Uyghurs actually is?
Yep, sure, thank you. So I co-run Students for Uyghurs with Eve, who's also here, you can see her here today. And essentially Students for Uyghurs is a student wing of the Stop Uyghur Genocide campaign. So the reason it's so important to have a student wing is because I believe, as somebody who's also a student, a little bit older, but I am too a student, that student activism and campaigning is incredibly important to any successful campaign. There are always going to be goals and aims of campaigns that are more tailored towards students, or that students can get behind. And in particular, we have a couple of those that we like to focus on in Students for Uyghurs. The first being that we aim to investigate UK university ties to the Chinese government, and ultimately to ensure that UK higher education institutions disaffiliate with any organisations implicated in Uyghur genocide. We believe that many higher education institutions in the UK likely have links with the CCP or what's going on in the Uyghur region, but we simply do not have enough information at the moment. And so what we have done is submitted freedom of information requests, and about, I think it's every single Russell Group university at the very least, to inquire about these questions and these areas. And we're hoping to get that information coming through in the coming weeks. And when we get that information, we'd like to pass it on to those relevant campuses, those relevant ambassadors at those campuses, so that we can start structuring our campaign efforts. The second issue that we think students will really resonate with, students are quite ethically aware. We love fashion, we love trends, you know, we're quite aware of what's going on around us. And so we need to raise awareness of the use of Uyghur slave labour in the clothes that we wear and the products that we buy. China is the largest cotton producer in the world. 84% of its cotton comes from the Xinjiang region. So, I mean, that's a huge amount. And we have a responsibility to know where we're buying our clothes from, what the sources of our clothes are. And we believe that as a student community who are very ethically aware, like I said, that we can lead the fight in that, and we can support others who are doing the same. Essentially, as British students, we cannot allow our universities to have any involvement in what's going on to the Uyghur people, in the plight of the Uyghurs and the Uyghur genocide. We have a responsibility and a duty to do something. And so that's where Students for Uyghurs comes in. When I first got involved in campaigning and activism, I think it was about 2.5 years ago on the Uyghur issue, I didn't have any support. There wasn't a network that existed. So I had to graft, I had to figure things out. I had to double check every bit of information that I read about what was going on, because it's so hard to know. And this is really an exciting time get involved. We have ambassadors for from almost every single Russell Group university. Russell Group unis are really important because of the research links. And you have fellow ambassadors. So you've got, Lucy, Astrid and Rahim, who are awesome here at Durham, but we've also got ambassadors at unis all across the UK. And so it's really an exciting time to get involved. You have the support, you have Eve and I who will provide you with the tools that you need, the networking, the links to carry out campaigns on your campuses, because you know your campuses better than Eve and I will. And so if you would like to get involved and know more information or want to become an ambassador, please do get in contact with Eve or myself. Or likewise, if you're at Durham and you want to do more on campus, then do get in touch with Lucy, Astrid or Rahim, and we can go into a lot more detail about it. But that's essentially Students for Uyghurs in a nutshell.
Thank you, Jaya. You touched upon some really important points within we've just said there. And recently an article was published by the Palatinate, which is the Durham University newspaper, for those of you who aren't aware, explaining that Durham actually has links to some universities in China who have links to the Chinese Liberation Army, nuclear weapons research and industrial espionage. There have been calls since to cut ties with these universities. So which other UK universities at the moment have relationships with the CCP that you are aware of?
So again, like I said, we believe that most, if not all, Russell Group universities will, because of the research links. We still have to get a lot more information on that. But more recently in the news, I think it was the University of Manchester, they ended a research project with a Chinese firm over alleged links to Uyghur persecution. So this was to do with implication in the surveillance that is used in the Uyghur region. And there have been, I think, about a dozen universities that are complicit in sensitive defense technology or producing technology or contributing to the production of this technology that is then being used in China and in relation to the Chinese government. So we don't know the details of all of those 12 universities. I know Imperial were most implicated. They were the ones that were named, but there will be countless others. The bottom line is that we know that these research links exist, but we need your help as students, as student ambassadors, to be able to orchestrate these campaign efforts and to demand that you get answers, because we do know that for some of the freedom of information requests that have come through, some universities have refused to engage, and that's quite worrying. That shows us something to hide. So we really need as much support as possible to establish those links. Like I said, this is not exclusive to Russell Group universities. There are plenty of other universities that have research ties. We know that there was a huge overhaul of PPE that was brought to this country that was used for medical students, and that was made using Uyghur slave labour. I mean, that, for example, is absolutely atrocious. We should not be complicit in that at all. So there are many avenues for us to explore at the moment. As time goes on, we will be focusing on those, and Students for Uyghurs will also be supporting general campaign efforts. So one of the actionable things that I would say that you can do after watching this today is to write to your MP and ask them to back the Genocide Amendment. There is an email template that Kirsty, I think, has linked or will be linking everything in the chat. That's incredibly important. If you have a Tory backbench MP or you know somebody that does, please urge them to write. Even better, see if you can request a call or engage in some type of conversation with them and make it evident that this is on the agenda, their constituents care, and we need to do something about it. At the same time, if you are also university students, whether you're at Durham or not, we do have universities that are planning campaign efforts around this area as well. And we know Durham, for example, have kicked it off with this event. So if you'd like to get more hands-on involved, please do let us know and we will support you as best as possible. That's the most important task that you can take away from today. I would say the second most important thing is to continue following what is going on to the Uyghur people, follow people like Rahima, other Uyghur activists, platform their voices. They are incredibly brave, speaking at great, great risk. So we have to be working with them. And I would also say that there is a huge amount of misinformation. It spreads like wildfire on social media. We've seen it, I think, Instagram, Twitter, it's all over. So we really need your help in disseminating trustworthy, reliable information about what is happening to the Uyghurs. When Eve and I get this information, when we find reliable sources, we will link that with you, update you with news articles, reports, documentaries, things that you can then share with people on your campuses. That will be incredibly, incredibly crucial to fighting this information. I mean, that's a huge uphill battle in genocide denial in general, and it's something that we have to now take a direct approach on. So that would also be very helpful.
I got a question about
Rahima.
I got a question about information security.
Just to that question, I would like to add, information about Oxford University renaming one of the very prestigious institute, Wickham Chair of Physics. It was now changed to Tension Wickham. So Tension is a software, China's software that is complicit in arresting, using that software as a high-tech surveillance and arresting the Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities in the region. And so these are the kind of knowledge that students must be aware of, and then to campaign and to remove these companies, operating so freely within our institutes, like Oxford. I think I just send the link, the Daily Mail link to the chat. You can read the article. It's all about money because of the £700,000 donation that they changed the name to Tension. And Tension is one of the software companies that is, if I repeat again, is complicit in the high-tech surveillance. And because the Uyghur genocide, we believe it's the first high-tech genocide. They're using the most sophisticated high-tech surveillance regime to target, arrest, and criminalize the people.
Thank you very much for that, Rahima. Now, if you just go on to Kirsty and Eve, if you've got any questions from the floor.
Hi everyone, sorry, thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Eve, this is Kirsty. I am co-chairs with Jaya of Students for Uyghurs. Kirsty is co-executive of Yet Again with Jaya and Joe, and we're going to be asking our lovely panelists any questions that you may have this evening. Please do message them to us if you have any questions. That's the best way for us to do it. It'll be the most efficient rather than asking them yourselves. The first question we have this evening is directed towards Rahima, and that is, do the Uyghurs wish for East Turkestan to be re-established? Now, I imagine you cannot speak for all of the Uyghurs who have various different opinions, but please do share your thoughts on that issue with us.
Yes, frankly speaking, when you are persecuted for decades, especially since CCP occupation 1949, in order to avoid the reclaim of East Turkestan, CCP named the region as Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. And if you read the autonomous region, a constitution is so beautiful. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of everything. Uyghurs has all the rights. And the Chinese government is there to develop, the region, to give Uyghurs a better life. But did they honor that? No. Since 1958, the rightist movement started throughout China. The people who suffered most are the Tibetans and Uyghurs and Mongolians, all these ethnic groups because of the distinct culture and religion. And then during the Cultural Revolution, then during the, since the early 90s up until now the genocide is happening. Of course, as human being, everyone wants to be free. Freedom is the number one thing for you to have your dignity and to live, in this, life is only one life. We only have one life to live in this world. Why do we want someone occupy our land and rape us and take all the resources and persecute? And then they claim that, these are the separatists because this is, you know, the sovereignty immunity. The countries are, again, the genocide often happens under this kind of, you know, when one nation believes they are the superior, they are the superior race. And that's what is happening to my people. In the past, if there are 50% of Uyghurs said we want independence, and 50% said, oh, it's okay if we can live happily, you know, under the CCP occupation. If you ask now, I can tell you 99% of the Uyghurs would say we want freedom. You know, the freedom can only be achieved through having our own, you know, our own country, because CCP fooled us for so long, since 1955. Imagine if the so-called Uyghur Autonomous Region, Tibet Autonomous Region, it was honored, all those rights that they have agreed on the paper, it was honored. We won't be sitting here talking about Uyghur genocide, you know? So therefore, yes, yes, that is the sentiment, and that is the feeling of every Uyghur want to be free. Yeah. And then look at Hong Kong, what is happening? You know, I'm sure Paul Chen can tell more. Did China honor the agreement? No. So this is a regime that is brutal and cruel. Why do we want this regime to continue to rule us and to make us suffer?
Thank you, Rahima. I'd like to move on to Jill next. We've seen in the past with previous genocides and the current situation with the Uyghurs, horrific accounts of genocide denial. How would you respond to those who seek to deny the truth?
I think there's a pattern with most genocide deniers, and it comes in threefold, because frankly, denial is, in its simplest form, illogical as well as deeply offensive. For deniers to be right, who would have to be wrong? First, experts, historians, those who study these genocides. And, you know, even with the Uyghurs now, we've seen quite a wide collection of evidence from NGOs, from experts in these fields. All of those would have to be wrong and or lying. Who else would have to be wrong? Survivors. Those who have provided witness testimony. Those who have said, I was there, this is what happened to me and my people. Every single one of them would have to be lying and be wrong. Third, and actually most importantly, perpetrators. Perpetrators would also have to be wrong and or lying. Now, with previous genocides, we have the benefit of time where we can investigate, and we have a vast array of historical resources. But even now with the Uyghur genocide, we have that evidence. You know, as Luke already mentioned, with the CCP, a lot of what they are doing is documented. It's in official CCP documents. That is there for us to see. But equally, we see on Twitter, Chinese embassies, both in the US and the UK, tweet the most horrendous pieces of denial. But also, if you go to them, I'm pulling one up now, an admission. And this was in January 2021 from the Chinese embassy in US. They tweeted, study shows that in the process of eradicating extremism, the minds of Uyghur women in Xinjiang were emancipated and gender equality and reproductive health were promoted, making them no longer baby-making machines. They are more confident and independent. Now, we know that the Chinese government is undertaking forced sterilizations on a mass scale. Whether or not the CCP dress it up in any form of fashion, that is an admission, the extent to which we will find out as this develops. The same again can be said for so many things. Rahima said at the very beginning, initially the CCP denied that there were any camps at all. A few weeks down the line, when evidence was presented to them, narrative changed. But well, yes, we do have camps, but they're re-education camps, vocational training camps. We see this time and time and again. And slowly we're starting to see the admission of the perpetrators of what they're doing, but rather than admitting, yes, it's genocide, they dress it up as something else. Well, it's counter-extremism, it's something else. But nonetheless, they are saying they've done it. And you see that pattern across all genocides. All three would have to be part of some vast conspiracy to be right. All those three groups of people would have to be lying and make it up. Now, in the situation of the Uyghurs, that conspiracy is nonsense, absolute nonsense. But most importantly, if you think about it purely on a logical basis, it doesn't make sense to exist. The UK and other Western countries benefit from having close, strong economic relationships with China. As we develop more and we're asking for preventative measures, and other states are saying, no, we will not tolerate this genocide and are taking preventative measures, you are damaging that relationship. It's against countries' own interests to prevent and recognise this genocide. So a conspiracy, quite simply, does not exist, and there is absolutely no foundation in logic for it to ever exist.
Thank you so much for that, Joe. My next question is for Luke. How do you ensure that your campaigning for Uyghur rights doesn't devolve into anti-Chinese racism or Cold War tactics, perpetration, Cold War, rhetoric?
Thanks, Eve. It's an important question, and it gives me an opportunity to say something which has unfortunately become necessary, which is that opposition to the Chinese government or the Chinese Communist Party is not the same thing as opposition to the Chinese people. Sadly, for reasons which are completely beyond me, some people don't seem to be able to tell the difference. I would go further and say that it is in fact a talking point of the Chinese Communist Party to try to conflate the party and the people. And there's this notion which you may or may not know, I'm sure some people on this call do know, of Han supremacy, or the rabid ethnic nationalism of the Chinese Communist Party, which tries to promote a particular ethnicity as being Chinese. And the conflation of that ethnicity with the party state, the all-encompassing state, which is growing and expanding its power as much as possible under the banner of Han nationalism, is what they want you to believe. So they want you to believe that a rejection of the Chinese Communist Party is a rejection of the Chinese people. It's a CCP talking point. And when I hear people throwing it around against campaigners, I just think, why are you using CCP talking points? Anybody with half a brain can tell you that what the Chinese Communist Party is doing, objection to the Chinese Communist Party, is not the same thing as the Chinese people. You'd have to be phenomenally stupid to make that conflation. There are 90 million members of the Chinese Communist Party, most of whom I would say, did not willingly choose membership of that party, or have done so because of some kind of job preferment, or because they felt they had no other choice. How many people are there in China? A lot more than 90 million. Okay, so I just tried to make a simple point here. We have to reject that conflation wherever we can, not least because, very unfortunately, as a result of the COVID outbreak, there are some really horrendous, deeply horrendous anti-Chinese attacks which have happened, trying to blame the Chinese people or people of Chinese appearance for the COVID outbreak. So all of this is to say that, unfortunately, some people do not seem to be able to tell the difference. It's a matter of huge frustration to me that those campaigning for Uyghur rights get accused of these kinds of things. When they do, I think unwittingly the people throwing around those accusations are using a Chinese Communist Party talking points. On the Cold War point, I would say simply this. Cold War rhetoric may not be terribly helpful, but it may also be a realization of the situation of isolationism within which China has placed itself. You know, the UK and many other leading Western nations have said for many years now that China is a leading member of the international community. I would argue, and many other people who take the same position as me would argue, that China is no longer worthy of that title, if they were ever worthy of that title. the things that they are doing to Uyghurs, and we're not just talking about gross human rights abuses to the Uyghurs, we're talking about the general isolation of that part of the world. The things that they have done to Hong Kong, detonating an international treaty with the UK unilaterally, and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the things that they are planning to do to Taiwan and threats they throw around there, punitive lending to Africa. This is not even to mention what's been happening to Inner Mongolia or other ethnic and religious minorities in China, including Christians, Tibetans, Falun Gong practitioners, the list goes on and on and on. This is not the behavior of a leading member of the international community. So, you know, I'm not that bothered, frankly. If people want to say, don't fall into using Cold War rhetoric, I'm very happy to be one of the people who stands and says, well, actually, China has placed itself in a position of such isolation that they are making themselves a pariah state. And if Cold War rhetoric is a way of realizing it, then actually I haven't got too much of a problem with it. What I have got a problem with is the ridiculous anti-Chinese, lamentable, disgusting anti-Chinese racism that we're seeing. They are not to blame. The people of China are not to blame for Xi Jinping's Chinese Communist Party.
Thanks. Oh, Rahima, on you go.
I would like just to add something. This is from 3 or 4 camp survivors out of 9 that I spoke to. And when they was forced to study or in the camp, and the party line, it says that in 2035, China will become the superpower. So all other countries will have to beg and listen to China. And in 2050, there will be one universe and one China. This is their party line, indoctrination line in these camps. So what we are now trying to save my people, actually not just saving the Uyghurs, actually saving ourselves, because this CCP regime is dangerous. It is dangerous for all our values. And I believe, you know, your generations, the new students, the young people must fight and to, you know, because especially in this country after this golden era during the Cameron's time, it seems becoming very, very difficult to detach, you know, with China at the moment. But I think people must realize the threat, you know, the threat of this, you know, rising superpower. They disregard the rights of any human being. What it is important is the power, for them to hold on to their power. That is the most important thing. They don't care human life. They don't care who you are. What they care is their power. So therefore, I think the whole world must rise up and fight against the CCP, but of course, not the Chinese people. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahima. I'd like to go to Luke first and then Jaya. Why are so many politicians wavering their responsibility to challenge this genocide?
Party whip, in a word. They just tend to do what they're told by their parties. It's very, very hard to vote against the party whip. People don't like doing it, particularly if they want a job. Right now, just to clarify for those who perhaps don't follow politics all that closely, we still have the spectre of a reshuffle coming up, which means that a lot of the younger, more ambitious MPs are thinking, well, I want to do everything I can to curry favor with the government, and rebelling against the government doesn't really fit into that. So that's problem number 1. I think problem number 2 is that the golden era, as Rahima mentioned, is dying very, very hard. There are a lot of proponents of it, and there are a lot of people in Parliament who believe that for our economy to flourish, it needs to be hitched to the wagon of the Chinese economy. And that was something that David Cameron and George Osborne believed fervently, and they embedded that throughout the civil service, and there are a lot of politicians who still believe it. So we're fighting against that, and we're fighting against the party whip. These are 2 very powerful things. And just to quickly finish off this answer, you have to imagine that the entire might of Her Majesty's government is bearing down upon us right now and trying to win a vote against us. And that doesn't just mean like a couple of whips. That means all of the whips, all of the deputy whips, all of the parliamentary private secretaries. And then you've got the fact that you've got the entire government's press machine working against you as well. All right. So this is David and Goliath. It really is. And this is why we need you. We need you to be speaking up and to be getting involved here and to putting pressure on your MPs and to get stuff in the media if you can, and even to do silly stunts. However much Eve might not think it's a good idea, you guys should be doing silly stunts. So that's my exhortation. We really do need you. This is David and Goliath. We're against a very well-disciplined, extraordinarily well-funded entire government's worth of resources. And we're trying to beat it on a very worthy cause, as Rahim has explained. So please help us.
Thank you so much for that, Luke. Jaya, did you have something you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I think Luke, I mean, obviously summarised it brilliantly, but I think as well, from sort of an outside politics perspective, having this discussion or encouraging dialogue about the issue of genocide prevention, where our values should lie, is really important, because the average person isn't probably going to be as crazy on reading up on the details of past genocides. How do we learn from what's happened? How do we understand the legal structures and all of these things? So we have to bring that discourse to public attention. I do think that there is a lack of political will often, and I say that having spoken to a Bosnian genocide survivor. He's incredible. His name's Safet Vukalic. He is, he works cross-party with everybody, but he always says, no matter who he works with, there is a lack of political will generally. So how do we shift that? Now, as a generation who are, we're sort of, as young adults, we are in the middle of two things. We are not just, saying goodbye to, a younger generation or an older generation. We're also shaping decisions that we're making now, shaping our society, right? So not just now, but also in the future. So we're in a very privileged position to be able to encourage this conversation. And so that's why having ambassadors on your campuses is really important, because we're bringing this discourse to different pockets of society so that people are saying that this is on our agenda, this is really important to us. And let's hope that in time our politicians start responding to that. There's enough conversation happening that even though they have a lack of political will, there is something there that allows them to think, actually, let's try and make something of this. We know that this is important to the people that we're working with. That's incredibly vital. And that's only going to come from the conversations our generation has, because like I said, we're the bridge. We're sort of in between those two areas. So hopefully as that goes on, we'll find more and more politicians are able to honour their commitments, not just say things to win votes in elections or because it sounds good on the 27th of January, but because they mean it, and we hold them to account by ensuring that everybody has their views heard and shared, but also that we make it clear that human rights, I always say this, like an assault on human rights anywhere is an assault on human rights everywhere. That's the bottom line, whether it's on our soil or it's abroad. And we need to have that conversation and show our politicians here in the UK that matters regardless of where their political will lies.
Thank you so much, Jaya. My next question is for Luke, which is, beyond the Genocide Amendment, what action would you like the UK to take against China? Are you advocating for military action, Magnitsky-style sanctions, economic blockade? What form do you imagine action taking?
That's an excellent question, Eve, and there are lots of ways of answering it. I think, first of all, the thing to say is that everything possible has to be done to avoid any kind of hot war with China, which is going to be exceptionally difficult because it's very likely that there's going to be some kind of incursion into Taiwanese territory, which unfortunately precipitates a response from the international community, and who knows what that response will be. What we have been advocating for in the Interparliamentary Alliance on China is what we call a reduction of strategic dependency upon China. And there are a number of ways of framing that. You could talk about that as a kind of polite way of saying sanctions, but it's not really that. It's slightly different. It's this. countries have found themselves unable to speak up against China's human rights abuses and general behavior, coercive economic bullying, whatever it is. And the reason for that is that they are economically dependent upon China. So our argument is, okay, if you're dependent upon China and it's muting you, it's preventing you from speaking out, preventing you from standing up for your values, then you need to reduce your dependency to the point where you're not in that position anymore. So we're promoting an audit of dependency in all of the countries that are a member of IPAC with the view to trying to reduce it. So those are the kinds of things that might help, because ultimately the bottom line is what matters most here. For scholars of Chinese culture or people who have lived there, and I know that there are some on this call, and you will know that face saving is extraordinarily important to the Chinese government, but to any Chinese government, but also good fortune and riding the wave of economic good fortune. And the minute there is a downturn there, I think that we will see behavior change. So that hasn't been the case so far. One important thing which hasn't been mentioned until this point, 2020 was a year of massive sanctions from the US towards China, the most hawkish any country has ever been towards China since they acceded to the WTO. Exports from the Uyghur region to China rose by 126% to the US from the Uyghur region in that period over 2020. So you've got to imagine, you're the Chinese government, you're sitting there thinking, yeah, you're all talk. You say how much you care about human rights, but you're buying our stuff. And we unfortunately are in a position where we have to reverse that trend, I think, if we're going to affect any meaningful change. So I would be an advocate of economic sanctions, but I think we can do a lot more before we get there. I think that the situation which is facing the Uyghurs more than warrants it, but they need to be coordinated and not bilateral. They need to be coordinated international, multilateral sanctions against China to ensure that that there is a corresponding economic downturn, which hopefully makes them think again while avoiding a hot war. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Luke. And I'd like to go to Rahima. For you, what is the one thing that you would like everybody attending this event to take away from it? Thank you.
One thing, I hope you learned what is happening and help this very pressing, urgent issue, the genocide amendment, reach out to your MPs and also raise awareness among your own friends and families and people, whoever that you can reach out to. And it would be really great hope for us if this amendment passes the House of Commons when it is, we don't know the date yet, but every MP, especially the Conservative MPs, if we win each MP, it makes a difference. So that's one thing that I would like everyone to take away and to help. And I'm very grateful. I say, so over 50 students attended this event, and this is encouraging, and gave up their own time at this time in the evening. And that is very encouraging for me. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for that, Rahima. I think we are approaching the end of our call this evening, so I think I'm just going to quickly leave you on a few actionable tasks that you can take away and do after this meeting. As Rahima just said, number one is to contact your MP. Above in the chat box, I have put in a link to the genocide responses form. If you click on the link, which we will email again around after the call ends, you can automatically input your postal code and your address, and it just generates an email for you. It's so easy. It literally takes 30 seconds. So there are no excuses. Everyone can do that this evening. Additionally, calling your MP, that is a much, much more effective way of getting their attention and outlining why you think it is important that they back this amendment. A personalised letter is also generally more effective than a template, but we would be appreciative of anything that you are willing to do and can do. Additionally, we have launched a petition. Well, two Holocaust survivors, Ruth Barnett and Dora Oliver Wolfe, have launched a petition. And this petition is to encourage Boris Johnson to meet with them ahead of the vote on the Genocide Amendment, and to listen to their reasons why they think it is important that the amendment passes. Amazingly, we have managed to get over 45,000 likes, signatures on this petition in the past few days even. Have had Dorrit on Sky News, and Stephen Fry has endorsed our petition. We would love it if you guys would add your names to it. So if you could please, please, please sign the petition and call your MP, we would be incredibly, incredibly grateful. Otherwise, I would like to thank all of our panelists for coming this evening, and to thank all of our guests for giving up your time and attending. And I would like to leave you on that note. Have a lovely evening and good night.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rahim, as well. Thank you, everyone.
Right.